Incremental readings. So you know what's the A factor? In case you don't know, watch the link in the corner. Then, in SuperMemo 19, has been introduced what's called the minimum U factor. It's just to prevent cramming. It's an anti-cramming protection, and it was introduced in April 2025. So basically, if you try to have a shorter interval, or to shorten the interval too much, SuperMemo will overrule this to increase it to a safe minimum. You know that in spaced repetition implements an algorithm that optimizes for the long term. If you want to cram, you will have the opposite. You want to optimize for the short term instead. It's a different optimization. Then SuperMemo always guarantees a lot of power to the user. That means that as a user, I can force a non-increase of the interval, meaning I do the repetition ahead of time when it's not even outstanding. Let's say that it's a month. So if the interval is a month, I'm not going to wait a month necessarily. It's been 2 weeks, I already do the repetition. I don't wait. You can do that. But then SuperMemo now, since April, the version of April, will overrule this. How? Let's see how. So the use interval is a number of days since the last review. Oh, I did this 2 weeks ago. I do it today. Therefore, the time that has passed is 2 weeks, not 4. 4 is what was scheduled. Nice. The U factor is how much the interval is supposed to grow. It's like the A factor is obsolete now for items, but more or less, to simplify, is the difference between the current interval and the previous interval. If the first interval is 2 days and the next interval is 10, then the U factor is 5, because the interval has grown 5-fold. Awesome. So then, for intervals very short, from 1 day, because in SuperMemo the minimum is 1 day, to 70 days, then the U factor has to be 1.7 times the current interval to the exponent of minus 0.1. And here is the plot. Nice. So I will be using Wolfram Alpha because I have this fancy grid. That means that the closest to 1 it is, the highest the minimum U factor. So the minimum is 1.7. So I have an item which the first interval is 1 day. I do the rep. The next will be 1.7 minimum. And this will be rounded up to 2 days. So the next interval cannot be 1 day once again. And the higher the interval, the lower it is the minimum A factor, but that's not linear. It goes down super quick, and then it goes more like asymptotic, closer to 1.1. Here, the 70 days will be 1.1. And from now on, up to 4 years, it will be a flat line of 1.1, meaning that it requires 10% increase. So if we have, let's say, the month example, it will be about 1.2 a little more, meaning that needs 20% extra. So if it's 30 days, the next interval cannot be 30. It has to be slightly more, 20% more. So 36, more or less, to avoid cramming. Nice. Remember that the A factor is, the minimum is 1.2. If we go to the settings, to the stats, and we go to the U factor, the A factor, you see that the minimum is 1.2. So that means that the U factor can still be lower, 1.1, lower than the minimum A factor. So you still have more massed practice still, but it's a minimum. And after 4 years have passed, there's nothing. SuperMemo won't overrule or reset the interval. Why? Because even as simple as that, it's so stretched to the future that cannot be considered cramming. So let's say that this is an item, and the element and the interval is 4 years. So even if I don't increase it, I violate the fundamental principle of spaced repetition of increasing intervals. I say once again 4 years, once again, the same interval is 4 years. I cannot consider this cramming if I need to wait for the next Olympic Games to happen, right? I will do more repetitions, absolutely, because instead of 1 decade, 3 decades, and that's it, I'm not going to see this item in my life anymore. I will see it every 4 years. So in the next 30 years, I will see it 8 times. I will do more reps overall, but it's not considered cramming because it is in the span of years. But you're still wasting your time, that's for sure. So remember, if you're using SuperMemo 19, I think it's the 08 or I think it's the 19.1, I'm not sure, the precise version that was introduced, but it was April 2025, you will have that. But remember, as I have mentioned in the beginning of the video, you have the power that you do an interval, then you do it so ahead of time, you're cramming so hard, that SuperMemo, no, is let me overrule this. So, overrule this. So I set a minimum of 1.1, but then, as a user, you can still overrule it once again. You can overrule the overruled interval. Control J is, it was 5. Let's say, okay, so let's make this up, because that's not an item, but as an example, that, it was a month, right? So then, imagine that SuperMemo calculated 36 because of this feature. No. You cannot go as low as you want it. It's reset to 36. I'm sorry, I don't want that. So let me do it once again as a user. And no, I want 30 once again. I overrule it. And you can even do something else that is, no. It's not just the case that I don't want to increase it. I it's like I put a ceiling, like some users in Anki, they put 180 days cap interval for the medical school. It's quite common, this practice. This doesn't exist in SuperMemo. There's no ceiling. The ceiling is your lifetime. You can only do that you don't increase it. You can decrease it if you want to, which goes absolutely against the principles of a spaced repetition, but it's because the fundamental difference. You're not optimizing to the long term. You're optimizing to the short term because you have an artificial requirement of having knowledge, the highest retention rate possible in a specific date because you have an exam. It's this difference. So remember, if you see that, hey, I'm using SuperMemo for the school and I rely on those, keep in mind that from now on, SuperMemo will be tougher. Meaning, as a user, you will have to overrule more often the scheduling algorithm because you want to use it for cramming. And SuperMemo, it's not for cramming. If you really want this, I do suggest to use RemNote, that now they have targeted this profile, this persona. So if you are in the school system, especially in America, use RemNote. It's the best one. It's just for crammers. You will use a spaced repetition at some degree, flashcards at some degree because there will be pre-done and so on, but it will be absolutely optimized for cramming and exams, unlike SuperMemo. That's all you need to know about the minimum U factor in SuperMemo 19. See you incrementally.